I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like. I thought it was the day Mark sat me down at our kitchen table, the one we'd picked out together at IKEA on a Sunday afternoon 6 years earlier, and told me he wanted a divorce. I thought it was watching him pack his things into neat boxes while I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, unable to move or speak. I thought it was signing the papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like old coffee and furniture polish, my hand shaking so badly I could barely write my name. But I was wrong. Rock bottom came later. Much later. Rock bottom was a Tuesday night in February, almost 2 years after the divorce was finalized. I was driving home from nowhere in particular. I'd just been driving, the way I did most evenings, because the silence in my apartment was unbearable, and at least in the car there was the sound of the engine and the radio and the illusion of movement. It was snowing, the kind of heavy, wet snow that made everything look soft and quiet and deceptive. I wasn't paying attention. Not really. I was thinking about Mark, the way I always was. Thinking about how he'd called me boring. How he'd said I was stuck. How he'd looked at me near the end like I was a piece of furniture he'd stopped noticing years ago. The car hit a patch of black ice. I felt it lose traction. Felt that sickening moment of understanding that I wasn't in control anymore. And in that moment, as the car started to spin, I thought, maybe this is easier. I don't remember the impact. I just remember the quiet afterward. The strange, suspended feeling of knowing something had ended. And then nothing. My name is Margaret. I'm 41 years old. I live in a penthouse in downtown Seattle with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook Elliott Bay. I run a successful urban planning consultancy that specializes in affordable housing development. I have friends, a life I'm proud of, and a sense of peace I never thought I'd find. But 7 years ago, I died alone in a car accident on a snowy road, 2 years after my husband left me for a woman who would eventually take everything he had. Except I didn't die. Or I did, and then I didn't. I don't know how to explain it. I don't have an explanation. I just know that I woke up. Let me start at the beginning. The first beginning. I met Mark when I was 26. I was working as a junior planner for the city of Seattle, buried in spreadsheets and zoning codes, trying to figure out if I'd made a terrible mistake choosing a career that felt equal parts boring and overwhelming. Mark was a friend of a friend, a financial analyst with a quick smile and an easy confidence that I found magnetic. He made me laugh. He made decisions quickly, without the agonizing second-guessing that plagued me. He felt like someone who knew where he was going. We got married 2 years later. Small wedding, mostly family, at a restaurant on Lake Union. I wore a simple dress I'd found on sale. Mark wore a suit he already owned. We honeymooned in Vancouver because it was close and affordable. It was nice. Everything was nice. For the first few years, marriage felt like what I thought it was supposed to feel like. We had routines. Sunday morning coffee and the New York Times. Grocery shopping on Wednesday evenings. We'd watch movies on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, and I'd feel safe. Content. But somewhere around year 5, something shifted. Or maybe it had been shifting all along and I just finally noticed. Mark started working later. He'd come home after I'd already eaten dinner, tired and distracted. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me one-word answers. Fine. Busy. Long. I told myself it was just stress. Work stress. Everyone went through phases like this. Then he started going out more. Drinks with colleagues. Networking events. A recreational basketball league that met twice a week. He was always busy, always somewhere else. And when he was home, he was on his phone. I asked him once if everything was okay. We were in bed, both of us staring at our respective screens, him at his phone, me at a book I wasn't really reading. Yeah, why? He said, not looking up. You just seem distant lately. He sighed, put down his phone, looked at me with an expression that I couldn't quite read. I'm fine, Margaret. Just tired. Okay. That was the extent of it. I didn't push. I never pushed. Because I didn't want to be the nagging wife, the needy wife, the wife who couldn't just let things be. So I let things be. By year 7, we were barely speaking. We'd have entire evenings where we'd exist in the same space without exchanging more than a few words. He'd eat the dinner I'd made, I always made dinner, even though I worked full-time too, because that's what I thought I was supposed to do, and then disappear into the spare bedroom he'd turned into a home office. I'd sit in the living room alone, watching shows I didn't care about, waiting for, I don't know what I was waiting for him to come back, I guess. For things to go back to how they were in the beginning. But they never did. The divorce conversation came on a Saturday morning in October. I remember because I'd been planning to suggest we go apple picking. I'd seen a post on Instagram about a farm in Snoqualmie that looked nice. I thought maybe if we did something together, something outside our normal routine, we could remember why we'd gotten married in the first place. But before I could bring it up, Mark said, "We need to talk." I knew. Of course I knew. You don't hear those words without knowing. We sat at the kitchen table. He had coffee. I didn't. I couldn't imagine swallowing anything. "I'm not happy," he said. "I haven't been happy for a long time." I nodded. I wasn't happy either. But I thought that was just what long-term relationships were. Comfortable. Stable. Not exciting, maybe, but solid. "I want a divorce," he said. The words landed like something physical. I felt them in my chest, heavy and sharp. "Is there someone else?" I asked. My voice sounded strange. Too calm. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "There's someone at work," he said finally. "Vanessa. We haven't. It's not physical. But I have feelings for her. And I think I need to be honest about that instead of staying in a marriage that isn't working." Vanessa. I'd heard him mention her before. She was a marketing director at his firm. Younger than me by 5 or 6 years. I'd seen her once at a company holiday party. Tall, polished, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in a glossy magazine. "How long?" I asked. "A few months." "Margaret, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. But I can't keep pretending. You and we're not good together anymore. You're stuck. You don't do anything. You just go to work and come home and that's it. I need more than that. You're stuck. You don't do anything." Those words would replay in my head for the next 2 years. A constant loop. Proof that I was insufficient. Boring. Not enough. "Okay," I said. He looked surprised. "Okay. If you want a divorce, then we'll get divorced." What else was I supposed to say? I couldn't force him to stay. I couldn't make him love me. So I said okay. He moved out the following week. Stayed with a friend while he looked for an apartment. The house felt enormous without him. Every room echoed. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen or the bedroom or the bathroom, forgetting what I'd gone in there for, just staring at the space where he used to be. I told people at work that we were separating. They said the appropriate things. "I'm so sorry. If you need anything." But their eyes would slide away from mine, uncomfortable with my sadness. I told my mother. She said, "Well, these things happen. You're young. You'll find someone else." I told my friend Rachel, my only real friend, if I was honest. She said, "He's an asshole. You deserve better." But I didn't feel like I deserved better. I felt like Mark was right. I was boring. I was stuck. Who would want me? The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was amicable, as far as divorces go. We split everything down the middle. I kept the house because Mark didn't want it. He took most of the furniture because I couldn't bear to have it. And then he was gone. Really gone. I heard through mutual friends, the few we still had, that he and Vanessa had started dating officially. Then that they'd moved in together. Then, less than a year after our divorce was finalized, that they were engaged. It felt like being erased. Like our 8 years together had been so meaningless that he could replace me in less than 12 months. I stopped going out. I stopped seeing Rachel. I'd make excuses. I was tired. I had work. I didn't feel well. Eventually, she stopped asking. I stopped putting effort into my appearance. Why bother? I'd wear the same rotation of clothes to work. Black pants, various boring blouses, comfortable shoes. I'd pull my hair back in a ponytail. I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped caring. My work started to suffer. I'd miss deadlines. I'd zone out in meetings. My supervisor, a kind woman named Patricia, pulled me aside once and asked if I was okay. I'm fine, I lied. You don't seem fine. Is there anything we can do to support you? I'm fine, I said again. But I wasn't. I was disappearing. I could feel it happening, like watching myself fade in real time, but I didn't know how to stop it. Then Mark and Vanessa got married. I saw the photos on Facebook before I could stop myself. She wore a stunning dress. They got married at a vineyard. Everyone looked happy and beautiful and alive. I deactivated my social media accounts that night. A month later, I lost my job. Patricia called me into her office and told me they were letting me go. Budget cuts, she said, but we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. I wasn't performing. I was barely showing up, even when I was physically there. I'm sorry, Margaret, she said. She looked like she meant it. I cleaned out my desk on a Thursday afternoon. No one said goodbye. I don't think they knew what to say to me. I lived off my savings for a while. I'd applied to jobs half-heartedly, never following up, never really trying. I spent most of my days in my house, too big, too empty, too full of ghosts. I'd sleep until noon. I'd eat cereal for dinner. I'd watch television until 3 in the morning, then fall asleep on the couch. Rachel called a few times. I didn't answer. My mother called. I answered once, told her I was fine, then stopped answering her calls too. I was sinking, and somewhere deep down, I knew I was sinking, but I didn't have the energy to swim. By the second winter after the divorce, I'd run through most of my savings. I was going to have to sell the house. I was going to have to figure out something. But the thought of figuring out anything felt impossible. That's when I started driving at night. I'd get in my car around 8 or 9, and I'd just drive. No destination. Sometimes I'd drive to the water and park and stare at the lights reflecting on Puget Sound. Sometimes I'd drive through neighborhoods I'd never been to, looking at houses with lit windows and imagining the lives happening inside them. Sometimes I'd just drive in circles, burning gas I couldn't afford, because it was better than sitting in my house alone with my thoughts. On that Tuesday in February, I'd been driving for almost 2 hours. It was snowing heavily, the kind of snow that makes driving dangerous, but I didn't care. I was thinking about Mark, about how he'd said I was boring, about how he was probably right, about how I'd wasted 8 years of my life on someone who'd looked at me and seen nothing worth staying for. I was thinking about how empty everything felt, how pointless. And then the car hit the ice, and I lost control, and there was that moment of spinning, that moment of knowing I was about to crash, and instead of being scared, I felt almost relieved. At least it would be over. The car hit something, a guardrail, maybe, or a tree. The windshield cracked. The airbag deployed. Everything went white and loud and then very, very quiet. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. And then there was nothing. I woke up to my alarm going off. The sound was jarring, familiar in a way that felt wrong. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, trying to turn it off, and my hand connected with something solid. I opened my eyes. I was in my bedroom. My old bedroom. The one I'd shared with Mark. I sat up so fast my vision went spotty. Mark was next to me, still asleep, his back turned toward me. The gray sheets we'd bought at Target. The IKEA dresser with one drawer that never closed properly. The window that looked out onto our small backyard. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. I'd sold this house. I'd been living alone. I'd been driving. I'd crashed. But here I was. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. The date on the screen made my stomach drop. It was 3 years earlier. 3 years before the divorce. 3 years before everything fell apart. I stared at that date for a long time, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. But the room was real. The sounds of Mark breathing next to me were real. The weight of the blanket, the morning light coming through the window, the smell of our laundry detergent, it was all real. I got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Mark. My legs felt shaky. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked younger. Not dramatically so, but younger. My face was less drawn. There were fewer lines around my eyes. My hair was longer, healthier. I looked like I had 3 years ago. I gripped the edge of the sink and tried to make sense of what was happening. Had I dreamed it? The divorce, the spiral, the accident. Had it all been some horrible, vivid dream? But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a memory. Solid and real and inescapable. I remembered everything. Every moment of the next 3 years. I remembered the divorce conversation at the kitchen table. I remembered Mark packing his boxes. I remembered the empty house and the lost job and the long, aimless nights of driving. I remembered dying. And now I was here. Back. Before any of it had happened. I didn't understand it. I still don't. There was no voice from the sky, no spiritual revelation, no explanation at all. I just woke up, and I was here, and I remembered everything that was going to happen. Or everything that had already happened. I didn't know which. Mark knocked on the bathroom door. "You okay in there?" I startled so badly I almost knocked over the toothbrush holder. "Yeah," I called back. My voice sounded strange. "I'm fine." "You've been in there a while." I opened the door. He was standing there in his pajama pants and an old t-shirt, looking at me with mild concern. "Just felt a little sick," I said. "I'm okay now." He nodded, already losing interest. "I'm making coffee. You want some?" "Sure." He headed downstairs. I stood in the hallway, trying to process the fact that Mark, my ex-husband, the man who'd left me, the man whose wedding photos I'd tortured myself with, was making me coffee in our kitchen like nothing had happened. Because nothing had happened. Not yet. I went back to the bedroom and got dressed in clothes I'd forgotten I owned. Everything felt surreal, like moving through a memory. I kept expecting to wake up, for this to dissolve into something that made sense. But it didn't. I went downstairs. Mark was at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, mine with a chip on the handle, his perfectly intact. He handed me mine. "Big day today?" he asked. I had no idea what day it was beyond the date on my phone. Not really. Just the usual. He nodded, scrolling through his phone while he drank his coffee. This was normal, I remembered. This was what we did. Existed in the same space, barely interacting, both of us absorbed in our own worlds. But I wasn't the same person I'd been 3 years ago. I had 3 years of memories, or future memories, or whatever they were, sitting in my head. I knew how this story ended. I knew that in 5 months, Mark was going to meet Vanessa at a company networking event. I knew that in 7 months, he'd start having feelings for her. I knew that in a year and a half, he'd ask for a divorce. I knew all of it. And I had no idea what to do with that knowledge. For the first few days, I didn't do anything differently. I was too disoriented, too busy trying to convince myself this was real. I went to work at my old job, the one I still had, the one I hadn't lost yet. I sat at my old desk in the planning department and worked on projects I vaguely remembered working on before. Patricia stopped by to check on a zoning proposal, and I had to remind myself that she didn't know yet that she'd eventually have to fire me. No one knew anything, because nothing had happened yet. It was like living in a memory. Everything was familiar but slightly wrong. The way things are in dreams where you know something's off but can't quite put your finger on it. At night, I'd lie next to Mark in bed and watch him sleep. This man who'd left me, who'd called me boring and stuck, who'd married someone else less than a year after our divorce. Here he was, right next to me, completely unaware of what was coming. I could warn him, I thought. I could tell him about Vanessa. I could say, in 5 months you're going to meet someone and you're going to fall for her and you're going to ruin everything. But what would that accomplish? He'd think I was crazy. And maybe he'd avoid Vanessa. But that wouldn't fix the fundamental problem. He didn't love me. He'd stopped loving me. Or maybe he'd never really loved me at all. Knowing the future didn't change the past. It didn't change who we were to each other. On the 5th day, I was in the kitchen making dinner, chicken and vegetables, something simple, when Mark came home from work. He dropped his bag by the door and came into the kitchen. "Smells good," he said. "Thanks." He stood there for a moment, and I could feel him looking at me. Really looking at me. "You okay?" he asked. You've been kind of quiet lately. I turned to face him. I'm fine. You sure? You seem, I don't know, different. Different. Because I was different. I was someone who'd lived through the next 3 years and died and somehow ended up back here. Just tired, I said. He nodded, accepting that. Well, I'm going to change. Let me know when dinner's ready. He left the kitchen, and I stood there holding a spatula, thinking, I can't do this. I couldn't live through this again. I couldn't watch our marriage slowly deteriorate. I couldn't wait for him to meet Vanessa and fall for her and tell me I was boring. I couldn't go through the divorce and the spiral and the loneliness all over again. But what was the alternative? Leave him now? On what grounds? I know you're going to leave me in a year and a half, so I'm leaving you first. I didn't know what to do. So I did what I'd always done. Nothing. I made dinner. We ate in near silence. He went to his computer. I watched TV. We went to bed. We repeated the same patterns we'd always repeated. And every day, I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to change. The breaking point came 2 weeks after I woke up in this strange second chance. I was trying to be a better wife. That was my strategy, though I didn't articulate it that way at first. I thought, maybe if I'm more interesting, more engaged, more fun, Mark won't leave. Maybe I can change the outcome. So I started trying. I suggested we go out for dinner at a new restaurant downtown. Mark looked surprised but agreed. At the restaurant, I asked him questions about his work, about his interests, trying to engage with him the way I hadn't before. He answered politely but seemed confused by my sudden attention. You're being weird, he said halfway through the meal. Weird how? I don't know. Just trying really hard. It's kind of intense. I deflated. I'm just trying to talk to you. We talk. Not really. Not like this. He put down his fork and looked at me. Margaret, what's going on with you? You've been acting strange for weeks. I just want us to spend time together. Is that so weird? It is when you've barely spoken to me for the last few months and suddenly you're acting like we're on our honeymoon again. He was right. From his perspective, this was coming out of nowhere. I'd been distant and checked out. I remembered being that way, even if I didn't fully remember why. And now I was overcorrecting, and it was making things worse. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He sighed. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I just don't know what you want from me. I wanted him to love me. I wanted to go back to the beginning when things were easy. I wanted to fix whatever had broken between us. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, nothing. I don't want anything. We finished dinner in silence. I tried other things. I suggested a weekend trip to the coast. He said he had too much work. I bought tickets to a concert for a band I knew he liked. He went but spent half the time on his phone. I tried to initiate sex one night. He said he was tired. Nothing was working. Every attempt I made to connect with him seemed to push him further away. And then I realized something. It wasn't that I wasn't trying hard enough. It was that I was trying at all. Because the problem wasn't that I'd been boring or stuck. The problem was that we were wrong for each other. We'd been wrong for each other for years. Maybe from the beginning. Mark didn't want me to be more exciting. He wanted someone who wasn't me. And I'd spent 8 years, or 11 years, if you counted the 3 I'd lived through twice, trying to make myself into someone he could love instead of someone I could respect. That realization hit me one night when I was lying awake next to him, staring at the ceiling. I'd been trying to save a marriage that wasn't worth saving. Not because Mark was terrible, but because we made each other smaller. We brought out the worst in each other. His detachment, my insecurity. We were trapped in patterns neither of us knew how to break. In my first life, Mark had left me, and I'd let it destroy me. In this life, I could make a different choice. I could leave first. Not out of revenge. Not to hurt him. But because staying was killing me slowly, and I'd already lived through that death once. I didn't want to do it again. The next morning, I asked Mark if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he'd asked for a divorce in my first life. But this time, I was the one speaking. I think we should separate, I said. He stared at me. What? I think we should take some time apart. A trial separation. Where is this coming from? We're not happy, Mark. You know we're not. I never said I wasn't happy. You don't have to say it. I can see it. You're distant. You're checked out. You'd rather be anywhere but here. And honestly, so would I. He looked genuinely shocked. Like he'd never considered that I might be unhappy too. I don't understand, he said. 2 weeks ago you were trying to get me to go to concerts and plan trips. Now you want to separate. I was trying to fix something that's been broken for a long time. But I can't fix it alone. And I don't think you want to fix it either. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see him trying to figure out what to say, how to argue, but he couldn't. Because I was right. I don't want a divorce, I continued. Not yet. I just think we need space. I need space. To figure out who I am outside of this marriage. And I think you need that too. Margaret. I'm going to get an apartment. Something small. Just for a while. We can figure out the rest later. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Are you serious? Yes. Is there someone else? The question almost made me laugh. No. There's no one else. This is about me. About us. About the fact that we've been going through the motions for so long we've forgotten what it's supposed to feel like. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, if this is what you need to do, then okay. Okay. The same word I'd said to him in my first life when he'd asked for a divorce. But this time, it felt different. This time, I was the one choosing to leave. And that made all the difference. I found a studio apartment in Capitol Hill within a week. It was small. Just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it had big windows and hardwood floors and it was mine. Just mine. Moving out was surreal. I packed my clothes, my books, my laptop. I didn't take much else. The furniture was Mark's, or ours, or it didn't matter. I wanted to start fresh. Mark helped me move, which was strange and sad and oddly kind. We didn't talk much. Just carried boxes down to my car, made multiple trips, unloaded everything into the tiny apartment. When we were done, he stood in the doorway, looking around at the space. You're really doing this, he said. Yeah. How long do you think you'll need? I don't know. A few months, maybe. However long it takes. He nodded. He looked lost, like he'd expected me to back out at the last minute. I'll call you, I said. Okay. He left. I closed the door behind him and stood in my empty apartment, surrounded by boxes, and for the first time in 3 years, in both lives, I felt like I could breathe. The next few weeks were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because I missed Mark, exactly, but because I was alone with myself in a way I'd never been before. No job to hide behind, no husband to deflect attention to. Just me, in a tiny apartment, trying to figure out who I was. I got a therapist. Her name was Dr. Sandra Liu, and she was exactly what I needed. Practical, direct, not interested in letting me wallow. In our first session, I told her about the separation. I didn't tell her about the other life, about waking up 3 years in the past with memories of a future that hadn't happened yet. That would have gotten me committed. I just told her that my marriage had been making me miserable and I'd finally done something about it. How do you feel now? She asked. Terrified. Of what? That I made a mistake. That I'm going to end up alone. That I'm just as boring and stuck as Mark said I was. Did Mark say that? I paused. Not yet. But he's going to. She looked at me curiously. You're very certain about the future. I just know how this ends if I don't change something. And what are you changing? Everything. I don't know. Myself, maybe. She leaned back in her chair. Let's start smaller. What's one thing you want to be different? I thought about that. I want to feel like I matter. Like my life means something beyond just existing. Okay. What would make you feel that way? I didn't have an answer. Not then. But over the next few weeks, sitting in that tiny apartment, I started to figure it out. I'd loved my job once, before everything fell apart. I'd loved urban planning, the puzzle of it, the way you could look at a space and imagine all the possibilities of what it could become. I'd loved working on projects that made cities more livable, more equitable. I'd stopped loving it somewhere along the way. Or maybe I'd just stopped trying. So I started trying again. I reached out to Patricia and asked if I could take on a more challenging project. She seemed surprised but pleased. She assigned me to a team working on a proposal for affordable housing development in the Central District, a neighborhood that was being rapidly gentrified. It was complicated, community opposition, budget constraints, political pressure. The kind of project I would have avoided before because it was too hard, too risky. But now I threw myself into it. I spent evenings and weekends researching best practices, reading case studies from other cities, attending community meetings to hear what residents actually wanted. I made mistakes, misjudged community sentiment in one presentation, underestimated costs in another. But I learned from them. I adjusted. I started to remember why I'd chosen this career in the first place. I also started building a life outside of work. I joined a book club at the local library, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. The first meeting was awkward. I didn't know anyone and I'd barely finished the book. But the second meeting was easier. And by the third, I was actually enjoying myself. I reconnected with Rachel. I called her one Saturday morning and said, "I'm sorry I've been a terrible friend. Can we get coffee?" She said yes immediately. We met at a cafe in Fremont, and I told her about the separation. "Good for you," she said. "I always thought you two were wrong for each other. You never said anything. You seemed happy. Or at least, you seemed like you thought you should be happy. I wasn't going to be the one to tell you otherwise." I wasn't happy. I haven't been happy in years. "So what are you going to do now?" "I have no idea. Figure it out, I guess." She smiled. "Well, you've got me for backup. Whatever you need." Having Rachel back in my life felt like finding something I'd lost and forgotten I needed. I also, somewhat impulsively, signed up for a ceramics class at a community center. I'd never done anything artistic before. I'd always thought I wasn't creative, that I was too analytical for that kind of thing. But I wanted to try something new, something that had nothing to do with work or my marriage or who I'd been before. The class was humbling. My first few attempts at making anything on the pottery wheel were disasters. Lopsided bowls, collapsed vases, clay stuck to my hands and my clothes and somehow in my hair. But the instructor, a patient woman named Gloria, told me that failure was part of the process. "You can't be afraid to mess up," she said. "That's how you learn what works." I thought about that a lot. About how I'd spent so much of my life afraid to mess up. Afraid to try anything I wasn't sure I'd be good at. Maybe that's what Mark had meant when he said I was stuck. Not that I was boring, but that I was scared. 3 months into the separation, Mark and I met for coffee to talk about next steps. He looked tired. Older, somehow. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Okay. You?" "Good, actually. Better than I thought I'd be." He nodded, stirring his coffee absently. "I've been thinking a lot. About us. About what went wrong." "Yeah. I think you were right. To leave. I think we needed this." It was strange, hearing him say that. In my first life, he'd been the one to leave, and I'd been destroyed by it. But now, hearing him acknowledge that we'd needed space, I felt relief. Not satisfaction. Just relief that we were finally being honest. "I think we should make it official," I said. "The divorce." He looked up at me. "You're sure?" "Yeah. I think we've been over for a long time. We were just too scared to admit it." I wasn't scared. I just didn't know how to fix it. Neither did I. But I think that's the point. We shouldn't have to fix something this broken. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's someone at work. Vanessa. I don't know if anything will happen, but I have feelings for her. I thought you should know." There it was. The beginning of the same story from my first life. But this time, it didn't hurt. Because I'd already left. Because his feelings for someone else didn't erase my worth. Okay, I said. Thank you for telling me. You're not upset. I'm not happy about it. But I'm not destroyed either. I think we both deserve to find people who actually want to be with us. He nodded slowly. You've really changed. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally figuring out who I actually am. We filed for divorce a month later. It was amicable, straightforward. We split our assets, sold the house, went our separate ways. And this time, when it was over, I didn't fall apart. Because I'd already lived through the worst version of this story. And I'd decided to write a different ending. The next few years were not easy. I want to be clear about that. This wasn't some magical transformation where I left my marriage and suddenly everything was perfect. I made mistakes. I had setbacks. I had days where I doubted every choice I'd made. But I kept moving forward. The affordable housing project I'd been working on got approved, and seeing it break ground felt like proof that I could do something meaningful. Patricia pulled me aside after the approval meeting and said, "You've really stepped up. I'm impressed." I got promoted 6 months later. More responsibility, more pay, more opportunities to work on projects I cared about. I also failed at things. I took on a project that was too ambitious and had to scale it back, which was humiliating. I pitched an idea to the city council that got torn apart in public comment. I dated someone for 3 months who turned out to be emotionally unavailable, and the breakup left me feeling stupid for not seeing it sooner. But I survived all of it. And I learned from it. By the end of the second year post-divorce, I'd built a life I didn't recognize from my first time through. I had friends. I had work I was proud of. I had a routine that felt like mine. Morning runs when my body felt up to it. Ceramics class on Thursdays, book club once a month. Small things, but they added up to something that felt like a life worth living. I heard through mutual friends that Mark had married Vanessa. They'd gotten engaged quickly, married within a year of our divorce being finalized. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No pain, no bitterness. Just a distant sense that it was exactly what I'd expected. And then, about 6 months after their wedding, I heard that they were having financial trouble. It was Rachel who told me. We were having dinner at her apartment, and she mentioned it casually. "Did you hear about Mark?" "No. What about him?" "Apparently Vanessa's been spending a lot of money. Like, a lot. Designer clothes, expensive trips, renovating their condo. And Mark's been going along with it, trying to make her happy. But I guess it finally caught up with them. Someone said they're in serious debt." I felt a flicker of something, not quite satisfaction, but maybe vindication. The universe had a sense of irony, apparently. "That's unfortunate," I said. And I meant it. I didn't wish financial ruin on Mark. I didn't wish pain on anyone. "You're more generous than I'd be," Rachel said. "I just don't care anymore. Whatever happens with him, it's not my problem." And it wasn't. For the first time, I genuinely didn't care about Mark's life. It had nothing to do with me. A year later, I heard they'd separated. Then that Vanessa had filed for divorce. Then that she'd gotten a substantial settlement because she'd been smart about protecting her interests. Mark had lost a lot. His savings, his condo, his sense of security. According to the rumors, he'd been blindsided by how quickly it all fell apart. I thought about reaching out to him. Not because I wanted to gloat, but because part of me still remembered the person I'd been married to for 8 years. Part of me felt sympathy. But I didn't. Because reaching out would have implied that I was still invested in his life, that I still had something to prove or something to say. And I didn't. I'd moved on. Really, truly moved on. Around the same time I was hearing about Mark's unraveling marriage, my own life was taking an unexpected turn. I'd been promoted again, this time to senior planner. The position came with a significant raise and the opportunity to lead major projects. One of those projects was a mixed-use development in South Lake Union, a neighborhood that was rapidly transforming from industrial warehouses to tech offices and luxury apartments. The project was controversial. The community wanted affordable housing and local businesses, but the developers wanted maximum profit. My job was to find a compromise that satisfied everyone, which felt impossible most days. I was in a contentious community meeting one evening, trying to explain the revised proposal to a room full of angry residents, when someone in the back raised their hand. "I'm not against development," the man said. He was maybe 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples and wire-rimmed glasses. "But this plan still doesn't address the displacement issue. You're building units that no one who currently lives here can afford." He was right. I knew he was right. But I also knew the constraints I was working within: budget, political pressure, developer demands. "You're absolutely correct," I said, and I saw surprise flicker across his face. "The current plan doesn't do enough. I'm working on revisions that would increase the affordable housing percentage, but I need community support to push back against the developers. Would you be willing to help organize that support?" He looked startled, like he'd expected me to get defensive. Then he smiled. "Yeah, I can do that." After the meeting, he came up to introduce himself. "I'm Owen Park. I teach urban studies at UW. Margaret Chen. Obviously." He laughed. That was a good answer in there. Most planners would have gotten defensive. I used to. Then I realized that being defensive doesn't actually solve problems. We started working together on the project. Owen helped organize community support, conducted research on comparable developments in other cities, even testified at city council meetings about the importance of truly affordable housing. He was smart, passionate, and refreshingly willing to admit when he was wrong about something. He was also easy to talk to. We'd meet for coffee to discuss strategy, and those meetings would stretch into long conversations about urban development, yes, but also about books and movies and life. It took me 3 months to realize I had feelings for him. I was sitting across from him at a cafe, watching him explain some nuance of housing policy with genuine enthusiasm, and I thought, oh, this is different. Not the dramatic, consuming attraction I'd felt with Mark in the beginning. This was quieter, more solid, like recognizing something you'd been looking for without knowing you were looking. But I didn't do anything about it, because I'd learned, through therapy and trial and error, that I needed to be okay alone before I could be okay with someone else. And I was okay alone, but I wasn't sure I was ready to risk that peace for something uncertain. Then, about 5 months after we'd started working together, Owen asked me to dinner. Not a work dinner, he clarified. A date. If you're interested. I almost said no. The safe thing would have been to say no, to keep things professional, to protect myself from the possibility of getting hurt again. But I'd spent so much of my life choosing the safe thing. And it had gotten me nowhere. Yes, I said. I'm interested. Our first date was nice. Easy. We went to a small Italian restaurant in Ballard and talked for 3 hours without any awkward silences. He told me about his work at the university, about his research on affordable housing policy. I told him about my job, about the projects I was working on. I didn't tell him about my divorce. Not that night. That came later, on our 4th date, when he asked about my past relationships. I was married, I said. For 8 years. We got divorced about 3 years ago. Can I ask what happened? We weren't right for each other. It took me too long to figure that out. He nodded, not pressing for more. I was engaged once. It ended badly. She cheated, and I found out in the worst possible way. I'm sorry. It's okay. It was a long time ago. And honestly, I think it needed to happen. I wasn't ready for marriage then. I'm not sure I would have been a good husband. I appreciated his honesty. The fact that he could talk about his past without bitterness or blame. We took things slow. Dates once or twice a week. Long phone calls. Getting to know each other without rushing towards some predetermined destination. It was different from my marriage to Mark. With Mark, everything had felt inevitable, like we were following a script neither of us had written. With Owen, everything felt like a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice to keep showing up and seeing what happened. 6 months in, he told me he was falling in love with me. We were at his apartment, sitting on his couch after dinner. He said it simply, Without drama. I'm falling in love with you. I wanted you to know. My first instinct was panic. To pull back, protect myself, find reasons why this wouldn't work. But then I looked at him. Really looked at him. At this man who showed up when he said he would. Who listened when I talked. Who treated me like someone worth knowing. And I thought, maybe I'm allowed to have this. I'm falling in love with you too, I said. He smiled. Good. That makes this less awkward. We laughed, and it felt easy, and for the first time in years, in either life, I let myself believe that maybe I could have something good without waiting for it to fall apart. By the time I hit the 5-year mark post-divorce, my life looked nothing like it had in my first time through. I'd been promoted to director of planning, overseeing a team of planners working on projects across the city. The work was challenging, sometimes frustrating, but meaningful. I was making a difference, not in some grand, world-changing way, but in small, concrete ways that mattered to people's lives. Owen and I had moved in together. Not because we felt like we had to, but because it made sense. We'd found a 2-bedroom apartment in Fremont with good light and enough space for both of us to have home offices. It was comfortable without being stifling. We had our own routines, our own friends, our own lives that overlapped without consuming each other. I'd also started a side project, a nonprofit focused on affordable housing advocacy. It had started small, just me and a few colleagues putting together information sessions for communities facing displacement. But it had grown into something bigger. We now worked with community organizations across the city, providing resources and support for residents fighting to stay in their neighborhoods. It was the kind of thing I never would have attempted in my first life. Too risky, too much work, too likely to fail. But I'd learned that failure wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Regret was worse. Rachel was still one of my closest friends. We had dinner every week, and she'd become close with Owen too. The three of us would go to movies or try new restaurants or just hang out at one of our apartments drinking wine and talking about nothing in particular. I'd even reconnected with my mother, cautiously. Our relationship would never be warm. She wasn't that kind of person. But we'd found a way to talk to each other without it devolving into criticism or defensiveness. I had a life. A real life, full of people and purpose and possibilities. And then, one afternoon, I got an email that changed everything. It was from a real estate agent, telling me about a property that had just come on the market. A penthouse in downtown Seattle. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, views of the water. It was absurdly expensive. More than I'd ever imagined spending on a home. But I'd been saving aggressively for years, and between my salary and some smart investments, I could actually afford it. I scheduled a viewing, mostly out of curiosity. Owen came with me. The moment we walked in, I knew. This was it. This was the space I'd been working toward without knowing it. It's perfect, Owen said, standing by the windows looking out at Elliott Bay. It's too much, I said. But I was smiling. You've earned this. You've worked your ass off for years. If you want it, you should get it. I thought about the woman I'd been in my first life. Depressed, isolated, driving aimlessly through the snow until I crashed. I thought about how I'd lived in that big empty house, drowning in the absence of Mark, unable to imagine a future where I mattered. That woman would never have bought this penthouse. She wouldn't have believed she deserved it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I made an offer the next day. It was accepted a week later. Moving into the penthouse felt surreal. Owen helped me pack up the apartment in Fremont, and we moved everything into the new space together. He was planning to keep his place, at least for now. We weren't ready to fully combine our lives, and that felt okay. Healthy, even. The first night in the penthouse, I stood at the windows looking out at the city lights reflecting on the water, and I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not pride, exactly. Not triumph. Just a deep, quiet sense of rightness. I'd built this. All of it. The career, the life, the peace. I'd done it without revenge, without bitterness, without needing Mark to fail for me to succeed. I'd just done it. About a month after I moved into the penthouse, I ran into Mark. It was at a professional conference on sustainable urban development. I was there as a panelist, speaking about affordable housing initiatives. Owen was in the audience, along with colleagues from my office and people from other planning departments across the region. I was backstage after my panel, talking to another speaker, when I saw him, Mark, standing near the registration table, looking at a conference program. He looked older. Not dramatically so, but worn down. His hair was graying. He'd gained weight. He looked tired. I almost walked past him. Almost pretended I hadn't seen him. But something made me stop. Mark. He turned. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. Then his eyes widened. Margaret. Hi. Wow. I didn't expect to see you here. I was on a panel. About affordable housing. He nodded, processing that. That's great. That's really great. You always cared about that stuff. We stood there awkwardly. 7 years since the divorce. 7 years of entirely separate lives. How are you? I asked, more out of politeness than genuine curiosity. I'm okay. Working as a consultant now, he paused. After some financial setbacks. But things are getting better. I knew about the financial setbacks. I knew about Vanessa leaving him, about the divorce settlement, about him having to start over from scratch. I'm glad things are improving, I said. Yeah. It's been rough. But I'm figuring it out. He looked at me more closely. You look good. Really good. Thanks. I heard you're doing well. Someone mentioned you're running a team at the city now. Director of planning, yeah. His eyebrows went up. That's impressive. Really impressive. There was something in his voice, admiration, maybe, or envy, or regret. I couldn't tell. Didn't particularly care. I should get going, I said. My partner's waiting for me. Partner. That's great. I'm happy for you. Thanks. Take care, Mark. You too. I walked away. Owen was near the exit, and when he saw me, he smiled. Ready to go. Yeah. We left the conference center together. As we walked to the car, Owen asked, was that your ex-husband? Yeah. You okay? Yeah. It was just weird, seeing him. But I'm fine. And I was. Seeing Mark hadn't hurt. It hadn't dredged up old feelings or old wounds. It had just been, nothing. A brief encounter with someone who used to matter and didn't anymore. That night, back in the penthouse, I stood at the windows again. Owen was in the kitchen making tea. I could hear him moving around, the familiar sounds of someone I loved doing ordinary things. I thought about both versions of my life. The first one, where I'd let Mark's leaving destroy me. Where I disappeared into myself and eventually died alone and forgotten. And this one, where I'd chosen differently. Not perfectly. I'd still made mistakes, still had moments of doubt and fear. But I'd kept choosing myself. Kept showing up. Kept building something worth having. The penthouse wasn't a symbol of revenge. It wasn't proof that I'd won some competition with Mark. It was just evidence of work. Of years of showing up. Of trying and failing and trying again, of refusing to disappear. I heard Owen come up behind me. He handed me a mug of tea and stood next to me, looking out at the view. What are you thinking about? He asked. Just how different things are from how I thought they'd be. Good different or bad different? Good. Definitely good. He put his arm around me. I'm glad. We stood there in comfortable silence, drinking our tea, watching the lights of the city. I'd learned something crucial in this second chance at life. You can't make someone love you. You can't control what other people choose. But you can control what you choose. Who you become. What you build. In my first life, I'd waited for Mark to validate me, to make me feel worthy. When he left, I crumbled because I didn't have a foundation to stand on. In this life, I'd built that foundation myself. Slowly, imperfectly, but solidly. And because of that, when Mark left, or when I left, really, I didn't crumble. I kept building. The penthouse, the career, the life I'd created. None of it was about Mark. It was about me. About finally understanding that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's perception of me. I don't know why I got this second chance. I don't know if it was real or if I'd imagined the whole first life in some kind of cosmic moment of clarity. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what I did with it. I chose myself. Not once, but over and over again. In small decisions and big ones. In moments of fear and moments of courage. And that made all the difference. A few months later, I was having dinner with Rachel at my place. Owen was there too, and we'd invited a few other friends, a small gathering, nothing fancy. Just people I cared about, in a space I loved, eating food we'd cooked together. Rachel pulled me aside at one point and said, "You know, I barely recognize you from who you were 7 years ago. Is that a good thing?" "It's a great thing. You were so lost back then. So unhappy. And now look at you." I glanced around the penthouse. At Owen laughing at something one of our friends said. At the life I'd built, piece by careful piece. I was pretty miserable, I admitted. We all knew. But you seemed determined to stay miserable, like you thought that's what you deserved. Maybe I did think that. For a while. What changed? I thought about how to answer that. I couldn't tell her the truth. That I'd lived through a version of my life where I'd let my unhappiness consume me completely. That I'd been given an inexplicable second chance and decided to make different choices. "I guess I just got tired of being unhappy," I said finally. And I realized no one was going to save me. I had to save myself. Rachel smiled. "Well, you did a hell of a job." Later that night, after everyone had left and Owen had gone home to his place, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine, looking out at the city. I thought about Mark, about where he was now. Rebuilding his life after Vanessa had left him. Starting over in his 40s, figuring out who he was outside of the identity he'd built. I didn't feel superior to him. I didn't feel vindicated by his struggles. I just felt separate. Like we'd been characters in the same story once, but now we were in completely different books. His choices had led him here. Mine had led me here. And neither of our endings were about the other person anymore. I'd heard through the grapevine that he'd started dating someone new. Someone age-appropriate. Someone kind. I hoped it worked out for him. I genuinely did. Not because I still cared about him specifically, but because I'd learned that other people's happiness didn't diminish my own. There's enough happiness to go around. Enough success. Enough peace. You don't have to tear someone else down to build yourself up. That was maybe the most important thing I'd learned. That choosing myself didn't mean punishing Mark. It just meant choosing myself. 5 years had passed since I'd woken up with memories of a life I'd already lived. 10 years since the divorce in this timeline. I was 41, the same age I'd been when I died in that car crash in my first life. But I was nothing like the woman who'd died. That woman had been hollow, defeated, lost. This version of me was whole. Owen and I got engaged. Not with a big production or a surprise proposal, but with a conversation. We were having breakfast one Saturday morning, and he said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Officially. Is this a proposal? It's a statement of intent. If you want it to be a proposal, I can get down on one knee and make it formal. I laughed. I don't need the theatrics. But yes, I want that too. We got married 6 months later. Small ceremony, close friends and family, at a botanical garden in the fall. Rachel was my maid of honor. Owen's brother was his best man. My mother came, and she even managed to say something nice. "You look happy." I was happy. Not the delirious, uncertain happiness of new love, but the steady, grounded happiness of knowing someone and choosing them anyway. Of being known and chosen in return. After the wedding, we combined households. Owen moved into the penthouse, and we reorganized the space to fit both our lives. His books next to mine. His terrible taste in throw pillows somehow coexisting with my minimalist aesthetic. The small compromises and negotiations that make up a shared life. It wasn't perfect. We had disagreements. Days where we irritated each other. Moments of doubt or frustration. But we had tools now, communication, therapy, the willingness to repair instead of just retreating. We had a foundation. The nonprofit I'd started continued to grow. We were now working with communities across the state, and we'd successfully fought several displacement projects. It was exhausting, often thankless work, but it mattered. We were making a difference, one community meeting at a time. I thought sometimes about the woman I'd been in my first life, the one who'd driven into that snowstorm feeling like her life was already over. I wished I could go back and tell her that it wasn't, that she had so much more in her than she knew, that the end of one story didn't mean the end of all stories. But maybe, in a way, I had gone back. Maybe that's what this was. A do-over. A chance to write a different ending. I didn't waste it. One afternoon, about a year after Owen and I got married, I was at a coffee shop working on a proposal for a new affordable housing project. I heard someone say my name. I looked up. Mark was standing there with a coffee in his hand. Margaret. Hi. Hi, Mark. Mind if I sit for a minute? I gestured to the chair across from me. Sure. He sat down, looking nervous. I saw the article about your nonprofit in the Seattle Times. It's really impressive. What you've built. Thank you. I also heard you got married. Congratulations. Thanks. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Mark said, I wanted to apologize. For how things ended between us. For the things I said. I'd waited years to hear this in my first life. Had imagined what it would feel like, how satisfying it would be. But now, hearing it, I felt nothing. It's okay, I said. That was a long time ago. It's not okay. I was cruel. I blamed you for things that were my fault too. I made you feel like you weren't enough when the truth was I wasn't showing up. We both made mistakes, Mark. We were wrong for each other. That's all. He nodded, looking down at his coffee. I've been in therapy. For the past year. Trying to figure out why my relationships keep failing. Why I keep making the same mistakes. That's good. Therapy helps. I'm with someone new. Sarah. She's a teacher. We're taking things slow. I'm glad. She's not like Vanessa. She's... He paused, searching for words. She's kind. Patient. She calls me out when I'm being an idiot. I smiled slightly. That's important. Yeah. He looked at me directly. I guess I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. And that I'm glad you're doing well. You deserve to be happy. So do you, Mark. He stood up. I should let you get back to work. But thank you. For listening. Take care of yourself. He left, and I went back to my proposal. The conversation had been, fine. Anticlimactic, maybe, but that was okay. I didn't need his apology to move on. I'd already moved on years ago. That's the thing about closure. You don't get it from other people. You give it to yourself. Now, at 41, sitting in my penthouse on a quiet Sunday morning, I think about both versions of my life. In one version, I let Mark's leaving destroy me. I lost myself completely. I died alone and forgotten, convinced I wasn't worth anything without someone else's validation. In this version, I chose differently. Not perfectly. I still struggled, still made mistakes, still had moments of fear and doubt. But I kept choosing myself, kept showing up, kept building. And the life I built isn't perfect either. Owen and I have hard days. Work is stressful sometimes. I still deal with insecurity and anxiety. I still have moments where I wonder if I'm doing enough, being enough. But the difference is, I don't need someone else to answer those questions for me anymore. I know my worth. I built it myself, piece by piece, decision by decision. The penthouse isn't a prize I won or proof that I'm better than Mark. It's just a space I earned through hard work and persistence. A place that's mine. And Mark's life, whatever it looks like now, isn't a reflection of my success or failure. It's just his life. Separate from mine. Unconnected. He's not my villain. I'm not his victim. We're just two people who were married once and aren't anymore. Who both made mistakes and both had to learn from them. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened, How I woke up 3 years in the past with memories of a future that hadn't happened yet. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was some kind of psychological break. Maybe it was a dream that felt like a memory. It doesn't matter. What matters is what I did with that knowledge. I chose differently. I chose myself. And that made all the difference. Owen comes into the living room with 2 cups of coffee. He hands me one and sits down next to me. What are you thinking about? He asks. Just how lucky I am. Luck had nothing to do with it, he says. You worked for this. All of it. He's right. It wasn't luck. It was choice. Over and over and over again. The choice to leave instead of staying in a marriage that was killing me slowly. The choice to go to therapy and do the hard work of understanding myself. The choice to build a career I cared about instead of just going through the motions. The choice to open myself up to love again, even though I was scared. The choice to keep showing up, even on the days when it felt pointless. You can't control what other people do. You can't make them love you or stay with you or see your worth. But you can control what you do. Who you become. What you build. You can choose yourself. Again and again and again. That's what I did. And it made all the difference.